Or I just chugged a whole Red Bull. I'm ready to go.
Jesus.
A day doesn't go by that I don't talk about Burt Reynolds. You know,
Many days go
smoking
by.
in
I
the
never
bed.
think about Burt Reynolds.
I think about it daily.
Junior,
So I already poured.
how did you get out of these loins?
Swear, boy. Man, that's probably my favorite Burt Reynolds movie, Deliverance.
Oh, that's a dark one for it to be your
That's
favorite.
a dark one to be your favorite.
I think that says more about you than it does about
Yeah.
Burt Reynolds.
Probably.
Hashtag awkward right there.
From El Toro Studios, brought to you by ElToro.com, the only one-to-one 100% cookie-free IP targeting solution. This is the Straight from the Bull podcast.
Welcome back to the 6th episode of the El Toro Podcast. My name is Kramer Caswell, and I am not sitting here today with David Stadler. He is on vacation.
Boo.
However, I am still sitting here with DJ Oz. So like I said, Stadler's on vacation, but filling in for him today is our favorite 6'6" branding connoisseur, Jason Loehr. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
I don't even know how you do this with Stadler. That's just a true work of art to be able to sit alongside that genius.
Yeah, I know,
Love
isn't
him.
it? I love that guy. It's going to be kind of weird sitting without him. I'm used to him right here. So, Jason, I have to give you some credit here because whether you know it or not, this podcast is sort of kind of your doing.
Oh, God.
Thanks, Jason.
It's my fault.
It is your fault. So
Sorry about
Let me
that,
think.
Apple iTunes.
probably about 6 months ago now,
Yeah.
you were talking about how El Toro needs to be a thought leader in the industry. And so I kind of took that to heart.
There you
And
go.
so we focused first on the website, getting that up to speed, and then we kind of moved into our blog. Bada bing, bada boom, here we are with the podcast. So I give you all credit
Well,
for this podcast, sir.
I just was trying to spark some thought, and yeah, you know, it's there's such an amazing group of talent here that when it comes to being able to establish credibility, and the technology is so fantastic, but the people behind it, the thinking behind it, actually adds a lot to the overall experience. So I'm glad you guys are rocking it out, and I'm honored to be a part of this this episode.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I really like the podcast, so kind of breaks up the week, and
Yeah.
it's awesome. So, as you know, we like to drink some bourbon here at El Toro.
It's a
So
beautiful thing.
you actually picked the bourbon today.
Yeah.
You want to talk about it?
It's actually not a bourbon; it's a rye. So it's
Get it right,
peerless.
Kramer.
Sorry.
Yeah, come on, man, for goodness sake. So Peerless actually, not that long ago, was recognized as the #1 rye whiskey in the world. And it's actually made about 6 blocks from here
Really?
at the Peerless Distillery.
Where's that?
It's actually, it's just down Main Street. I mean, it's at Main and like 9th, I think, Street.
Huh.
So, one of the guys that used to work
poured
with
way
me,
too much, by the way.
it's okay. It's we always encourage responsible consumption, but it's fantastic. But Peerless, so these guys, they've done everything really right. So they started this product a few years ago where they laid down some grain alcohol that was fermented and became what it was, the base of this rye whiskey. And when they did that, they actually made vodka and gin, I think, or moonshine for a while it was aging. So this is actually a 2-year-old rye that won the best rye whiskey in the world, and it is fantastic. And it's a beautiful. The bottle
Yeah, the
itself is
bottle's
fantastic.
awesome. It looks.
And
super
one of the
nice.
guys that used to work for me, Cordell Lawrence, is their head of marketing, who's just an awesome guy, and it's just so exciting to see what he's doing with that group and how the product itself is just fantastic. They are pretty close to also having a bourbon that will be coming out here shortly if it hasn't already.
awesome.
So it's top notch, and the bottle is fantastic. It's a heavy bottle.
Yeah,
Retails for about
looks like a barrel.
$125, and it's super awesome.
All right, well, don't tell Stadler we're drinking this because it's probably supposed to be off limits. All right,
true.
cheers.
Cheers.
Chink.
Hoorah.
Cheers.
So when I do bourbon tastings in today's world, I'll typically will include Peerless just to show the differences between a rye, because rye is a little bit harsher, got a little bit more of a kick to it. It's just the difference between, if you think about rye bread and wheat bread. But the
That's a
beauty
good
of
point.
the beauty of rye whiskey is that when it comes to old fashions, if you're not using a rye, you probably should be, because it just truly is where all the flavor can really rock it out.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I like rye. This is going to be bad, but I like rye probably a little bit more than bourbon. Personally.
I'm with you. I mean, it's just there's so much you can get so much more complexity out of a rye.
Yeah,
than
this
you
one's
can.
really good. I haven't had it before. I've had the Angel's Envy rye.
Yeah,
And that used to be
really
one of my
good
favorites.
product.
Yeah.
Yep. Nice.
I noticed
Awesome.
that you have some chocolate over there, and Kramer mentioned that
Well,
sometimes you taste
Yeah, you
the
have
chocolate.
you have a very interesting process for when you taste bourbon.
Well, the tastings are fantastic, and I've been fortunate to do over 100 or so tastings in my years because before I went to Inspire Brands and my time at El Toro, I was at Brown-Forman for a while, so got to know a lot about bourbon tastings and the process. And with tastings, when you add things like chocolate or Parmesan cheese to the tasting, it's kind of like, what? But then whenever you actually go through the process, the way that you can introduce flavors and wood notes versus floral notes, it's a totally different experience. And when you have that piece of dark chocolate that you take a bite of and then taste the bourbon after it, it tastes like a completely different product.
Yeah.
It's really cool the way that you can kind of pull those notes out. And it's totally different than a wine because here you're talking about 40% alcohol versus around, 15% alcohol. So there's a little bit more bite to it, but I think there's also more complexity.
You do something else that's interesting that I'd never seen before, where you take a little bit of the bourbon and put it on your hand.
Yeah,
And then you
rub it in your
together.
hands, and then because you want it to and then you kind
you
of put it
smell
over
it,
your
right?
nose and smell it because it really helps to open your olfactory senses. And your nose is such a huge part of the process that whenever it starts to pull out notes that you didn't know before, it's just a fun way to do it. And plus, it's the best hand sanitizer in the world. When you pour a little
true,
bourbon
yeah.
in your hands.
That is true.
It's kind of a win-win situation for everybody.
You must have showed Dan, one of the founders here, that trick because I saw him showing one of the clients, and I was like, man, he's punking these guys. Like, why are they rubbing this bourbon on their hands?
It's a real thing, and actually, I learned it from Chris Morris, who's about as good a bourbon taster as you'll find on planet Earth. And he talks about it a lot because the other piece to it is that beyond just rubbing it in your hands and getting your olfactory senses going, whenever you actually do a tasting, just like with a bottle or a glass of red wine, whenever you scroll it around and open up the notes and get some air in it, that's the last thing that you want to do with bourbon. Instead, with bourbon, you just take a little drop of water and put a little drop of water in it, and that will open up the notes in a totally different way.
You learn
People are like,
something new.
and you get like purists are like, I don't want any water touching my bourbon or any ice touching my bourbon, but the ice is actually a good thing because it'll slowly open up and give it a different experiences in the long term. It's just that's the fun part about whiskey tasting itself, whether it's bourbon or Scotch or Japanese whiskey.
There is a right way to taste bourbon, then.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, but the beautiful thing is the right way is your way because as long as you're drinking
Yes,
it, that's
I'm
all
not
that matters. Because bourbon, at the end of the day, bourbon is the official spirit of the United States. So we can't lose sight of that fact. Just like Scotch in Scotland and Japanese whiskey in Japan, it's just bourbon's our thing.
Yeah.
So God bless America.
And Kentucky's. Well, that's awesome. So for people that are listening that don't know Jason, you used to sit here at El Toro.
I did.
So let's go back a little bit farther.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your history
Oh man.
and how you ended up sitting at El Toro for a little bit and then what you're doing now.
You know, the thing about this, especially in the world of digital, which is where I got my start back when I helped launch the Camping World online catalog. The guy that I was working with at Camping World when I was a sophomore in college in 1994, we launched this Camping World online catalog at a time when websites were not anything what they are today, and we had a Netscape Livewire server running in the back overflow room of the call center at Camping World that they would use during Christmas time, and that's how we launched the whole thing. And when I left a few years later, it was about 25% of the catalog business and percentage of sales, so it was kind of a big thing. And I thought, gosh, this is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I always stayed with it, and the digital pieces were such a great foundation because as the 90s led into the 2000s, I launched, did a lot of work with Humana, built out their digital team from a very, very small group of about 3 or 4 of us to when I left there were, oh my God, probably 70 or 80 that we had in the team.
Awesome. Nice.
And in a very short amount of time I've been very fortunate to be on some patents for work that we did. And, we went into a space when the Medicare prescription drug plan was being launched, and literally it was a wild, wild west, and we enrolled something like 300,000 Medicare-eligible consumers via the interwebs.
Good Lord.
And these are like, grandparents and, it was an interesting time because we actually targeted communications to the adult children for these Medicare eligible consumers, and it worked out famously.
How were you doing that back then?
Back then, it wasn't nearly as advanced in the targeting that you see today, but because a lot of it was online through email, a little bit of some display, and keywords were a huge driver. Google was probably the vast majority.
Yeah,
of it.
that's when PPC was cheap too, right?
And it was early days for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then I did that for a while. I actually worked on the agency side for a while through through a company called MadPal. That's based in Boston, who is just a phenomenal user experience design agency. And I built their Louisville office and did a lot of work in the healthcare space, but then some fun clients outside of that, one of which happened to be Brown-Forman. And at a point in time, they Brown-Forman actually, as they were going through some regime changes, they saw the opportunities in the work that we're doing on the digital side, and they basically made me an offer I couldn't refuse and said, well, why don't you join us full time? So I was actually, believe it or not, traded for 3 cases of whiskey. So and Bad Pal, Will Pally and Amy Cueva, who are just people that I just still adore to this day. When I told them, I said, hey, Brown-Forman's made me this offer, and I'm probably going to have to join. They go, that's fine. We hate to lose you, but we kind of felt like this was going to happen. But we'll make it whole, because I didn't have a contract with them technically. But they go, we'll make it whole if you get us 3 cases of whiskey as a result of this. And I said, sure. So luckily it was Jack Daniel's, Gentleman Jack, and Woodford Reserve. So I was at least in the super premium category. So no offense to early times and on Canadian Mist, but at least they got good value out of me.
That's awesome.
And Brown-Forman was a great run. That was. I led a variety of different shared services. So, like, I looked after media, e-commerce, consumer research, insights, digital. We had somewhere in the neighborhood of around 300 Facebook presences alone for Jack. It was ridiculous because this is at the time when a lot of this was also being created. And
Yeah.
so having all these different areas and connecting the dots globally, having teams in 8 different countries, having the digital compliance piece, which was a huge part of our lives, and an amazing team that looked after that. And they like to do their. There was several reorgs that the organization was going through with change is a big part of that. So, as that change was happening, I ran into Dan, and he's like, why don't you just come work with us? And it was great. I jumped in, and here's Chief Strategy Officer, doing a lot of work with not only on what we're trying to do on the sales side, but also with Rich and the team, and it came to product design and things that we were building, evolving, that continue to happen to this day. And it's one of those things that, seeing the evolution, seeing how fast it was changing, it was great. And still being in contact with Dan, it's fantastic to see the work that you guys continue to do, and it's great to be able to come back here and you know what, and as it turned out, I got an opportunity I couldn't really refuse, to work with some very, very close friends and contacts at Inspire Brands, where I'm at now. So at Inspire, basically the company was created back in February of this year, which we own Buffalo Wild Wings, Arby's, and our taco. Rusty Taco, which is a smaller footprint than the 1,000 or 1,200 stores of Buffalo and 3,000 Arby's. But, it's handling media there for across and all, building a capability, sitting alongside the being a part of the executive team that's creating what is Inspire Brands, both culturally, technically, technology-driven, data strategy group that we are. And it's just been awesome.
Yeah. So I would venture to say, obviously you have a breadth of experience. You have a really good insight into branding and storytelling. I think that's one of the hallmarks. I think that's one of the things that I took away from your time being here at El Toro, because you came in probably 3 or 4 months after I started, and I was just some kid off the street that came in and started working here, and you took the time to really help me grow, and so I appreciate that. But I love your take on branding and some of the things that you've left a lasting impression on me.
Well, and part of when you think about the challenge and opportunity that sits in front of a company like El Toro and other technology companies for that matter, but especially when it comes to the startup view of companies, sometimes you can get truly in love with your technology so much that you lose sight of exactly what it is you're trying to do. And part of that is being able to package the story, because like El Toro, I still talk to Dan about this whenever we hook up to this day. It's like you have such great technology, but there's a barrier to the understanding behind that, because it's so advanced and so powerful that there's a narrative there that continues to evolve, and it's hard to really capture that, because as both a brand and a technology, you're trying to establish what's great for the immediate term, but also building for something that's much longer.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, what really makes a good story for a brand?
Well, and it's different in the world, I think, of services and products, because part of it is like that bottle of Peerless whiskey right there. I can pick that up, and there are immediate cues to the story that call out without saying anything. Services, it's a little bit harder, and I remember going through this in the Humana days, because it's intangible. You can't really touch it, and I can't experience it. I get it because I go to the doctor's office and I try to get something, and is it covered or not? And so it's just your experience with the brand is different. So that context is so critical. And when it comes to the storytelling piece to this, and I definitely am biased, because I do teach a class at U of L in their master's program called Digital Disruption and Modern Media, and one of the topics is storytelling, and we talk about what makes for a great story, and there's a few things that come to life. There's this notion of kind of, there's novelty, meaning, and relevance, which are the kind of the first three things that I look at when it comes to good stories. So novelty, is it going to make me laugh? Is it going to make me smile? Is there some meaning behind it? So there's actually something that's actually of value. And when you think about the notion of social currency these days, and is me telling the story actually going to give me some cred, and people are like, that's a really cool story.
Yeah.
And then relevance, to make sure that, when it comes to the stories that are being told, do they connect back to the brand that you're trying to establish as a part of that? And the other thing is originality, which I think is something that people can get lost on when it comes to a good story, because think about the movies today and how many remakes there are.
Remakes. And
it's like that's why I have such an appreciation for, a guy like Quentin Tarantino, who starts with a blank piece of paper and is like, what is this story that I want to create?
Tarantino.
And Wes Anderson is another one who's probably my all-time favorite, because the stories are so different, and they're so unique, and they're so original. And there's a lot to be said for that. And I think that it goes back to, there's maybe 3 stories at all in the world that exist that everything riffs off of. But there's just some originality that's truly appreciative. And then the last thing is just authenticity. And authenticity these days, it's funny when there's a tool inside of Google to look at trends of use of words over time. And authenticity going back to like the 1700s or whatever was super high. And when you look at literature and what's been printed, and then as it goes down over time, it slowly creeps down. But then starting around the 40s or so, it starts to come back up. And now it's a huge part. And everybody's claiming authenticity and doing that. And there's a book called The Authentic Brand, which has a really good quote that I've used in class before that talks about authenticity is, something worthy of belief and trust, and neither false nor unoriginal. In short, genuine and original, which is so simple. I'm a huge golfer, and I think about authenticity as something that's like, there's a quote that I think it was Gary Player that talks about golf, or Arnold Palmer that talks about golf, where he says it's something that's so delightfully simple yet incredibly complex. And it's like, put this white ball in this cup, and that's all we got to do. And so authenticity, it's like, sure, just be genuine and original. But getting there is so incredibly complex, because you just, when it comes to being able to open your doors and actually be genuine and show this is what I am in real, that is not easy to do. And the one reference that I use a lot is there's this thesis that this Syracuse student wrote about Nike trying to get into the world of skateboarding. It's something like Nike and the swoosh and skateboarding, and it talks about how Nike for years tried to crack the nut on skateboarding and tried to get into that space and got shut down so many times. And part of it was they were doing so in such an inauthentic, unoriginal way that they felt they could get to the masses. That particular audience is so if you're a poser, if you're somebody that's coming in trying to get in and do the cheapest, fastest way, you're going to fail every time. And they finally got it right because they started to do
those
things.
days. Yeah,
they started to do things specifically for shops, different from what you would see at like an Urban Outfitters.
Yeah, because
it's just a different experience.
I wouldn't say I was a skater. I didn't skateboard, but I rode motocross, so I was kind of in that extreme sport realm. And I remember when Nike 6.0 came out, that was like the big breakthrough, and everybody started wearing it. I love Nike 6.0.
And it's just, and I personally, when I see where they're at today and the evolution that's happening in sneaker culture, I honestly think a lot of that goes back to that learning around that world of skateboarding. Because if you were not authentic, if you didn't get this right, that audience is so fickle. And it's one of the things that I even to this day, when I'm traveling in cities I've never been, and I'm always curious to go check out a skate shop. I was a big skateboarder growing up, so I just have such an appreciation for that culture. And it is one to where it's like, if you're not genuine, if you're not an authentic in that space,
don't want it. Yeah,
they don't want it, and you're going to get rejected every time. And it's hard because it's such a niche versus where kind of everything is going today, mainstream wise.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that as a culture, like, it's just harder for corporations or businesses or people to be authentic, or have we become more cynical, and do people want to break apart and pull apart businesses more?
Well, I think part of the challenge is that the role of brand is changing, and where people relied on brands for a very long time, you're starting to see this change in these direct-to-consumer brands like an Allbirds that doesn't need the mass distribution of a Dick's Sporting Goods or a Walmart or a Target to get things done. I can go directly to you. You kind of saw it, a couple of years ago with Dollar Shave Club. But that direct-to-consumer model, people are like, listen, if you give me a great product that's valuable to me, that lasts, that's quality, that's all that, and I can go directly to you, have that conversation with you, do more things that are maybe a little bit more custom, give you a little bit more information because I build trust with you, and then you start to build some things more for me. It's disrupting just about every industry and every category out there. And so the role of brand is changing, but the thing is that brands still do exist, and they're still important. Because the one thing that when you think about the mass scale of where some brands are going and are getting to, it's about making sure that they can have that repeatable success. Because really, to me, a great brand is really about repeatable success. I can tell you that, my experiences in the Jack Daniel's world, whether I was in Azerbaijan or in Sydney or in Guadalajara or wherever, if I opened that bottle of Jack Daniel's, it was going to be the same product that I knew and loved, and every time, without that consistency was always there. And it also sets a mark when it comes to the premiumization of that and being able to build for what is a premium product. But brand to me is it's still a real thing, and frankly, I think more than ever, it's actually more important now than it's ever been, because brands are seeing themselves go from just that bottle of Peerless right there to when I go to the distillery. If I see that's tagged, so you see a lot of line extensions, you see a lot of branding where people will want to borrow the equity off of a brand like Woodford. You see the bars that are out there that are Woodford branded bars. You're setting an example, and you're setting a point and reference that people are like, oh, I see that brand, and what do I think? There's quality, there's consistency, there's premium. And so being able to kind of go in and out of that and drift off of that is important. And that's why I think you're going to continue to see brands, but how they come to life is changing at such a dramatic scale.
Well, so to follow that up, I have another question, because the branding is very much alive. But how does branding today kind of work closely with like digital strategies?
Sure.
Because I think it's a really interesting topic of discussion, and I know there's a ton of blog posts of people talking about how do I bridge the gap between digital advertising and still speaking the language of our brand.
Sure.
Can you talk on that?
The thing about what you see today is that the barriers to entry are really starting to get smaller and smaller when it comes to how new brands get established. I mean, you think about a brand like Allbirds, who gets started in doing Facebook advertising and doing some very, very highly targeted, highly nimble, highly personalized forms of advertising, and how that market share is able to grow because people start to talk about it. They start to reference it in other content, whether that be blogs or, doing things very guerrilla in that exercise. But today's brand building world, the ability to get to that scale pretty quickly is right there. And it's not easy. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I can just, it's not super simple, but the building blocks are there when it comes to seeing how others have done it. So in my point of view, when I think about where brands are going and how important it is when it comes to the role of digital marketing in this case, the thing that's of particular significance is the role of content in that storytelling.
Yeah.
And so I'm storytelling about this brand, and for something, whether that be if I was starting a new energy drink, or I was starting another service along, that could be whatever technology or whatever new offering. It's truly about establishing the credibility of that, and one way to do that is to go onto Medium, start a profile on Medium, and start writing about my product. Start getting some feedback from others and taking that feedback in. That's where, like Kickstarter, when it comes to you think about how brands are being created there every day, they extend that because they start there, but it starts with a lot of writing because you get the updates on the product, you get the videos and stories about the product, you get every step along the way as those products are coming to life, and it seeds with you a connection that then you can extend into how I'm talking about the continued evolution of the product when it comes back to my site and my personal, the site that I own when it comes to the e-commerce side of it. So that's where that's why I just love to spend time just taking a look at things like Kickstarter, and just seeing what else is out there, because you can see
stories.
And it's literally these guys have great ideas. I actually just ordered a board game that was off of it for the girls, and I'm getting updates about, we did this is different, we changed these coins out, and there's a relationship that's building there, because at the end of the day, those brands, any brand is wanting to establish a great relationship with its consumers. And if I can do so without many layers in the middle, my last name, without many barriers between me and that consumer. Because if you think about it, in my spirits days, we as the manufacturer of the product, the creator of the product, went through a distributor, who went through a retailer, who eventually got it to a consumer. So there's 2-3 steps in the middle there in most markets. If I can eliminate those, and I can go straight and have the conversation with you, I'm getting so much more data around you. There's so much more value to that, both in the immediate term and in the long term, because when I want to make a new product, the first people I'm going to consult are going to be the people that are existing ones, and say, here's some examples, test this out, what do you think of this? Because I've got a pool to work with there to help craft what my long-term strategy looks like. So brand plays a huge role in that, because it's connecting those dots in a big way, and it's getting me closer to that consumer, and digital can do that in ways that other forms just can't. I mean, and it's just, when you look at the efficiencies on the cost of it,
it's so much
I
cheaper.
can get direct cost benefit analysis to understand, hey, I invested this and I netted this out of it. And and even for CPGs and some others that there may be steps in between, there's still good ways to understand what the value is and the return of what I'm investing.
Gotcha. Let me ask you this, because I listen to a podcast a lot, and his name's Gary V.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you probably know Gary.
He's an amazing guy.
I love his podcast. He had a question that somebody asked him, so I kind of want to ask you, what would be your top tips for people that are starting a company or starting a business online? What would be some of your top tips moving into their branding strategy online?
Well, if you think about it, so I come from a background where you've got some of the traditional, I guess probably all initiated with P&G, who's just a master at when it comes to the traditional theses and just approaches to building a brand. And things like the OGSM model. I'm very familiar with the work around brand triangles, and some of these are tools, but they're just really solid, because what it does is you're organizing your thoughts around who the hell am I as a brand, and what do I stand for? How do I differentiate myself? So things like getting to your brand promise. So my brand exists to
Blank.
X, based on an insight from a consumer's perspective. There's a thing that I used to do with my staff at both at Brown-Forman, and then also a little bit with the Humana side, which actually was some extensions off of the work that was done within. If you're familiar with Google Ventures, they have there's a consulting arm that's actually connected into Google for the folks that they invest in, where they get access to the resources. But there's this technique called the molecule, and it's a very simple exercise where you're basically having 3 dots. But ultimately, what it stands for is the user, the problem, and how my product solves that problem. It's a very simple model, but it basically says, this user, and I describe it as much in detail as I can, the problem that they face, and how my particular solution or how my particular offering helps to solve that problem. And when you think about that and connect it back into the brand triangle around elements like I exist to do this, targeting this audience, you're just breaking it down to understand truly who it is you're trying to reach, what it is you've got to talk to them about, and the context of which you can reach them. When you break it down to its molecular level, the way that I teach it to my classes is you've got three dots. You've got the audience, you've got the message, and you've got the medium with which you're going to reach them. Very, very simple stuff. But it's literally, as a brand, once I get into the communication side, this is what I want to follow. So you've got your brand triangle and the elements of it, and then your communication strategies. And digital plays a role really on both of those, because the brand itself, what digital can do is get you immediate reach. It can get you a global footprint in a matter of no time.
Yeah.
But you've got to know who you are. It's the hardest part, because it's one thing to go out and build content and do all this, but if you don't know who you are as a brand, none of it matters.
Yeah,
and
that's a good
that
point.
whole idea of the personality, who we are, the brand values, the benefits that I can see on the rational side, on how I feel about it, and then how I look how I'm recognized as a brand. It's just truly organizing who you are before you go out and try to engage somebody, because if you don't have a great understanding of that as a brand, you kind of don't have a lot to stand on.
Yeah, you don't really know what you're doing.
It all goes back to, as you said earlier, authenticity. Because you can fool somebody once, but to be a brand.
Well, and that's the difference between renting consumers and being able, because anybody will take up you can get anybody with an offer or get some sort of a hook to get them in, but to get them in there and keep them for the long term, that takes a totally different level of engagement and a totally different level of trust. And that's the thing where you can really make or break when those, especially if I'm a Kickstarter project, I can get you over that hump one time, but how's that going to build that out going forward? And that's hard to do.
That's awesome. I'm going to listen to this podcast over and over again just to understand, just to get more
like I'm
insights
rambling.
from Jason Loehr.
Professor
I feel like
No, man, it's
I get into
great.
wormholes.
I love it. Well, we're getting close to cutting it.
Yeah.
So, Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Oh,
man.
my pleasure. And when you talk about other references, one thing that I do want to call out, which is something that I read daily, is a guy, Ben Thompson, and he has a blog and a website called Stratechery that is just phenomenal. And it's the
I like that name.
yeah, it's the one thing that I try to read every day.
Okay.
It is just it's a great resource. It's less about brand, but it's more about just the world of digital right now and what's happening. And, like with Facebook and Twitter and Google on the Hill yesterday testifying and the outputs of that. But it's just really good insight and strategy around what we're doing right now, because brand plays a role in it every once in a while. But it's I look at it, I always see things through that lens of the brand whenever he's talking. Because it's about, because like the connections of things like Spotify and brands that didn't exist 10, 12 years ago that are now just daily part of our lives.
Awesome.
His Google title is American Analyst.
Yeah, and I tell you, this is such a time of change, because
It is, it really is.
You think about brands and how they're establishing themselves, and the thing that I was reading the other day, I think it actually was one of his things, was talking about how, behemoths like Spotify and Netflix and others that are looking to things like the Google Store, like iTunes, and saying, yeah, I don't think I really need you to do the processing of these payments. I think I can do this on my own.
I can do it myself, yeah.
But thinking about going in and logging into Netflix and paying for your Spotify account there because they've got a relationship together. I mean, that's what we're starting to see, is that these whales as brands and experiences are starting to get, Spotify, and it's like, are you a label or not? Because we're trying to figure that out right now.
Spotify singles.
It's just, I tell you, it's just, and
super
and
interesting
again,
times.
it goes back to the brand, because now when I see that Spotify brand, it adds a whole new layer of of both biases that are already built in, but then also opportunities of what could be new that I would want to engage with.
I mean, that's opportunity, but also vulnerability, because it's like, what is this brand? But we won't go into that.
Exactly.
That's a little bit too much.
Next time.
Next time.
We'll have to have part
Next
two.
time we'll get into the brain and how the different areas of the brain actually are affected by brands.
Ooh,
and
that would be
that's
interesting.
a whole other conversation.
Professor Loehr.
We'll talk that and why Jason.
There's not enough bourbon for that conversation. You may have to
why
supply
Jason
bourbon.
hates PowerPoint so much. That's another thing we'll have to talk about.
I don't hate PowerPoint. People just try to do too much with PowerPoint. It's like, am I presenting or am I doing a leave behind?
Oh yeah.
I've presented this 252 slide PowerPoint with 8 paragraphs per slide.
It happens. Kids these days. What you gonna
All
do?
right, everybody. Thank you so much for
Thanks,
listening
man.
to the 7th podcast. Wait, are we on the 7th?
Yeah,
What are
you're
we?
living in the future, buddy.
Future. Oh, that's the next one. We're on the 7th. We're gonna have Statler back
know a
here on
little
the
bit about
7th
number
podcast. So, all right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you back here next Friday on the El Toro Podcast.
You've been listening to the Straight from the Bull podcast from El Toro Studios, brought to you by eltoro.com, where we target people, not pixels.
Come talk about brands, dude. Plug it.